Hi, I'm Tom, a senior full-stack developer, and in this video, we're going to be building a functioning YouTube clone. To build this clone, we're going to be using Node.js, TypeScript, and MongoDB on the back end, and then on the front end, we're going to be using React and Next.js. To build this clone, we're going to be covering concepts such as Node read and write strings, and advanced React concepts. So let's get started building this functioning YouTube clone. Welcome to the YouTube clone tutorial. The features that our clone is going to have is we're going to be able to register a user. That user is going to be able to log in. Then we're going to get the currently logged in user. You're going to be able to upload a video, and we're going to use strings to do this. You're going to be able to fetch all the videos, and then you're going to be able to stream a single video. The technologies we're going to use to create our clone is Express, Mongoose, TypeScript, Argon 2, and we're going to use Argon 2 to hash our passwords. We're going to use Busboy, Pinot for logging, and Zod for validation. For the front end, we're going to use Next.js, we're going to use Mantine UI library, and we're going to use TypeScript, of course, and we're going to use React Query. So what we need to follow along with this tutorial? Well, you'll need a code editor. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code. You'll need something that you can use to make requests to our API. I'm going to use Postman, but you can use Insomnia if you like. You're going to need a browser. I'm going to be using Chrome. You need a running instance of MongoDB, and you need Node.js installed. If you're missing any of these requirements, now is a good time to pause the video and go get them installed. So what will you learn? You're going to learn a bunch of stuff by watching this video. You're going to learn some REST API principles. You're going to learn some authentication principles. You're going to learn about MongoDB with Mongoose. We're going to also do graceful shutdowns. You're going to learn about file upload streams with Node.js, video streaming with Node.js, Next.js, Mantine UI library, which is currently my favorite UI library. You're going to learn about React.js's context API, and you're going to learn about Express and React.js with TypeScript. And you're also going to learn about clean project structure. So this is the structure that the video will take. First up, we're going to do a demonstration of the working application. Next, we're going to do a code walkthrough of all the code that we're about to build. Then we're going to bootstrap our server, and then we're going to build our user features, so register, login, and some Express middleware. Then we're going to build our video features, such as upload video, update video, get all videos, and stream video. Then we're going to set up our client. We're going to build out our auth screens, and we're going to build out our video upload and our video streaming screens. Before we get started, if you're having trouble following along, you'll be able to find a link to the GitHub repository in the description below. In that repository, you're going to see a few files. The first one is this notes file, and this is going to contain all the commands that you need to install dependencies and bootstrap our server and bootstrap our client. The second file you'll see is this YouTube clone Postman, and this is a Postman collection that you can import into Postman, and that's going to give you all the requests that you see me using throughout the tutorial. And these are the requests that are inside of that Postman collection. The third file is a Postman environment. In Postman, you need to make sure that you have an environment selected at the top here, because we have some test scripts here that are going to set some environment variables. If you don't have an environment set, then these environment variables, of course, are not going to be set, and you're going to be wondering why. So let's get started with a demonstration of the application. So you can see I have a pretty basic layout here, and the UI of this application is going to be very underdeveloped. And the reason for that is because you're going to be able to build features on top of this once you've finished, and you're going to be able to put this project inside of your portfolio. I'm going to show you the basics of everything that you need, and then you'll be able to build on top of that. So this project is going to become yours, and not just one that you followed in a tutorial. So you can see here that we have a single video file here. And if I click on this, we're going to be able to go to a screen that starts streaming the video. So if we have a look at what is happening here, you can see in the console that we're streaming chunks of this file, and these chunks are 1 megabyte each. And the reason for this is because we don't have to download the whole video file before we can start playing it. So if we skip to certain sections of the video, you can see that we download the chunks for that section and we can instantly play it. And this is going to make your streaming experience much nicer. And this is what all streaming sites do, such as YouTube. If we come back to the index of our application, you can see that we have a register link here. So let's register an account. I'm just going to do b@b.com. My name is going to be B, and then I'm just going to set my password to password. My account is going to be successfully registered, and we get this little notification down the bottom here. I'm going to log in with b@b.com and password. And once we've logged in, we no longer get our login and register links. Instead, we get this upload video button here. So let's click upload video, and I'm going to select a video file. And once the video has finished uploading, we're going to get this form where we can edit the details of the video. I'm going to say my awesome video. We can set a description, and then we can set the video as published. And once we click save, we're going to get this video here that we can now click on, and we can start streaming the video. So inside of our code base, we have two folders. One is called client and one is called server. Inside of server, we have a source directory. And inside of the source directory, we have this main file here. And main is going to bootstrap our Express server, and it's going to set up a bunch of configuration for us, including graceful shutdowns. Next, we have this modules folder, and modules is going to house all of our resources. So you can see here that we have an auth module, a user module, and a video module. Inside of each module, you're going to find a controller, a model, some routes, a schema, and a services file. The first file of interest is the routes file. So this is going to define all of the routes for this resource. And in this case, this is videos. So this is going to define a route here for uploading a video. So upload video handler is going to be a controller. So we can go into here and we can find all the logic for our controller. And controllers are going to call services. So if we have a look at this create video function here, we can see that this is in video services, and this is going to talk to our database. So our controllers never talk to our database directly. We call services, and services call our database. The next file is our model. And for our models, we're going to be using TypeGoose, and this is going to allow us to export nice interfaces along with our models. The final folder is our schema, and this is going to house our Zod validation. So you can see here that we create a validation schema for our body and our params, and then we can export some types. So you can see here, update video body is a nice type that has a title, description, and published. And we use these schemas inside of our routes to validate requests. So process request body is going to sanitize our request body, so we can put anything we want in there, and it's going to be removed if it doesn't live inside of the update video schema body object. And if we have a required field that is missing from the body, we're going to return an error to the user. Inside of our client, we have a standard Next.js application. So we have our pages. Inside of pages, we have an app, a document, and an index. And then we have our auth, which houses login and register. And then we have a watch folder where we're going to be able to watch a single video. So let's get started building this YouTube clone. So I'm here in a new VS Code window, and I'm going to start by creating a new folder. I'm going to call this folder server. And then I'm going to cd inside of the server directory. And I'm going to type yarn in it, and this is going to initialize our project. I'm just going to press enter for all of these questions. And if we go into server, you can see we now have a package.json file. The next thing I'm going to do is to install all of the dependencies. Again, you can find this command inside of the notes file in the repository on GitHub. Inside of our dependencies, you'll notice that we have one called Argon2. If you have any trouble installing this dependency, make sure you're using Node version 16. I'm using Node Version Manager here, so you can see that I can switch through different versions of Node. And if you're having any trouble, just make sure you switch to version 16 and you shouldn't have any more troubles installing Argon 2. Next, let's install our development dependencies. And then we're going to initialize our TypeScript project. So I'm going to type npx tsc-init. And this is going to create a tsconfig file for us. And you can see here that we get this nice big tsconfig file with lots of comments and everything. And we're going to make a few modifications to this file. And the first one we're going to do is to set an app directory. And the reason we're going to do this now is because if you build this project without an app directory, you're going to build it inside of your server folder, and this is going to be really annoying. And so I'm going to just set mine to build, and this is going to build the project into a folder called build. Sometimes you'll see this folder called dist, but I like to call it build. The next thing we need to do is to create a new folder. I'm going to call this src for source, and this is where we're going to house our source code. Inside of the source directory, I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to call this main.ts. And inside of main, I'm going to initialize our Express application. So I'm going to import Express from Express. And say const app equals Express. And I'm going to define a constant called port. So I'm going to say const port is equal to process.env.port, or we just want to set this to 4000. Next, I want to say const server is equal to app.listen. And we're going to listen on our port, and then we're going to provide a callback that does a console.log. Server listening at HTTP localhost, and then our port. And we're going to change this console.log to use our logger once we've set that up. And the reason that I assigned our server to a variable called server is because we can close this server instance when we get a kill signal. So let's go define that now. So I can say const signals is equal to, and these are the signals that we want to listen to. We want to listen to sig term and sig int. Next, we want to say for let I is equal to 0, I less than signals.length. So we're just going to loop through all of these signals and then say, once we get them, call this graceful shutdown function. Then we'll say graceful shutdown. And we want to pass in our signal. So let's define this graceful shutdown function. So I'm going to say function graceful shutdown. And this is going to take one argument. This is going to be our signal. And that's going to be of type string. Next, we're going to say process.on, our signal. We want to call an async function. So the first thing we want to do is to call server.close. And then later on, when we have our database set up, we want to disconnect from the DB. And then we want to call process.exit, and we want to call this with an exit code of 0. So when you press something like Control C, then this is going to send a kill signal, and we're going to run our graceful shutdown. I'm going to say log at the end here, console.log, my work here is done. So let's go run our application. So come into package.json, and I want to create a scripts. And inside of scripts, I want to create a dev command. And my dev command is going to be tsnd, and this is just ts node dev. Sometimes you'll see it ts node dev, all spelt out like that, but you can just use tsnd as shorthand. And I want to give this a flag of exit child. And this means that we're going to exit this process when we send a kill signal. I want to give it another flag of transpile only. And the file that we want to start is in src, and it's main.ts. So let's run this with yarn dev. And you can see here that our application has started up and we're listening on port 4000. So let's send a kill signal with Control C. And you can see that we get a log here. My work is done. Let's go over and log out the signal that we got. Log goodbye dot signal. And then we're just going to log the signal here. Let's run this application again. Control C, it says goodbye, got signal, sig nt. And so when you press Control C, you're going to send this signal to the application. The other signal that you might be able to send to your application is a kill signal. So you might say kill -9 and then your process. So the next thing that we want to set up is our logger. So inside of source, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call this utils. And inside of utils, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to call this logger.ts. And we're going to be using Pinot as our logger. So I'm going to import Pinot from Pinot. I'm going to say const logger is equal to Pinot. And I want to set the transport to an object. And the target is going to be Pinot pretty. And this just means that we're going to get some pretty logs. Without using a pretty logger, the logs are quite messy, and you might want to only set this to work in development and have the messy logs inside of production. Next, I'm going to create an options object, and inside of options, I'm just going to have colorize set to true. Let's export our logger, export default logger, and now we can use this logger throughout our application. So now we'll set up our database connection. So inside of utils again, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm just going to call this database.ts. I want to import mongoose from mongoose, and I want to say const db connection string is equal to this connection string. So we also just want to say process.env.connection string or this string. And this file is going to export two functions, one to connect to our database and then another function to disconnect. And then we can call that disconnect function inside of our graceful shutdown. So I'm going to say export async function connect to database. And I want to wrap this in a try catch block. And I want to say await mongoose.connect. And then I want to connect to our DB connection string. Once our database is connected, we want to log to the console. So I'm going to say logger.info. Now we just want to say connected to database. If we experience an error, we want to log the error, and then we want to exit the process because the application can't run without an open connection to our database. So I want to say logger.error, and we put the error inside as the first argument, and then we're going to say failed to connect to database. And then we'll also just say goodbye. Then we want to call process.exit, and we want to exit with a status code of 1 because we're exiting with an error here. The next function is to disconnect from our database. So I want to say export async function disconnect from database, and I want to call await mongoose.connection.close. Then I want to say logger.info disconnected from database. Then I simply just want to return from this function. Let's go back to main, and we can replace this console.log here with a logger and make sure it's importing from util/logger.info. And then we can do the same with this other console.log. And then we have another console.log at the top here when we start our server. And after we've closed off our server, we can close off our database connection. So I'm going to say await disconnect from database. I'm going to execute that function. Move this comment up. So when our server starts, let's connect to our database. So I'm going to change our callback function here to an async function. And then now I'm going to say await connect to database. Let's run our application again, yarn dev. And you can see here connected to database, and then the server is listening, and this is our Pinot log. We'll come back to our main.ts, and we're going to set up a few bits of middleware that we're going to need for our application. So the first one is going to be the cookie parser. So I'm going to import cookie parser from cookie parser. And then just under app, I'm going to say app.use. And then I'm going to pass in cookie parser, and then I'm going to execute that function. The next one is express.json. And this just means that we're going to be able to pass JSON bodies. So I'm going to say app.use express.json. And this used to be Express body parser, which was a separate piece of middleware, but now it's just built into Express. And then another piece of middleware that we're going to use is cause. So I'm going to import cause from cause. I'm going to say app.use cause, and then cause is going to take some parameters. So the first one is going to be our origin, and I'm going to set our origin up inside of a constants file because we're going to use this when we set a cookie as well. So inside of source, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this file constants.ts. And then inside of constants, I'm going to export our cause origin. So I'm going to say export const cause origin is equal to process.env.cause origin, or HTTP localhost port 3000. And so port 3000 is where our client is going to run. So basically what we're saying is we're going to allow requests from this URL here. Otherwise, we're going to get the URL for our client out of our process.env. So let's set this cause origin. And then the next thing we're going to set in cause is credentials true. And this just means that our cookies are going to work for us. Then the last piece of middleware that we're going to use is helmet. So I'm going to say app.use helmet. And I'm just going to execute this and use the default options. And helmet is a piece of middleware that is going to help make your application a little bit more secure by setting some headers and hiding some headers. Okay, let's get started with our user module. So inside of source, I'm going to create a new folder and I'll call this modules. And then inside of the modules folder, I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to call this user. And this is going to be our user module. Let's create all the folders for our modules. So I'm going to create another folder and I'll call this videos. And then I'm going to have another folder called auth. And I'm going to separate the auth and user modules. So auth is going to be responsible for issuing tokens and logging in and that sort of stuff, where user is just going to be responsible for managing the user resources. And when I say user resources, I just mean objects in the database. So we'll start by creating all the required files. So I'm going to create a new file called user.controller.ts, user.model.ts, user.route.ts, user.schema.ts, and user.service.ts. The first file that we're going to work on is our user model. So come over to the user model file, and I'm going to import an object from @typegoose/typegoose. From typegoose, I'm going to import get model from class, prop, and pre. I'm going to define a user class. So I'm going to say export class user. And if you're not familiar with how TypeGoose works, you're going to export a class, and this class is going to be your TypeScript interface. But then you're also going to use this class to export a model. So to put some props on our class, we use the @prop annotation, and then we can pass our Mongoose requirements into @prop. So I can say required is true and unique is true. And then we need to name the property. So I can say public username, and then we can provide a TypeScript type for this. So I'm just going to say string. And you'll notice that we get an error here, and it says experimental support for decorators is a feature that's subject to change in the future. Set experimental decorators to true in your tsconfig. So we need to find this property, experimental decorators, come over to our tsconfig file, and then we just need to set this property to true. And then we can come back to our user model, and we still have an error. And this is because we need to set the strict property initialization to false. So we can come back to our tsconfig file, find strict property initialization, uncomment that, and set it to false. Come back to our user model, and our error has now gone. Let's set another property on our model, and I'm going to call this email. And then I'm going to have one more property, and this is going to be our password, but it doesn't need to be unique. Okay, so that's all I'm going to have on my model for now. So we can export this as a model by saying export const user model is equal to get model from class, and then we need to pass in our user class. We can also set some schema options on here. So I want to set timestamps to true. So the second argument is going to be an object, and then I'm going to say schema options, and then schema options is going to be an object, and then I'm going to set timestamps to true. And this is going to add a created at and updated at stamp to our user objects. Okay, when we create a user, we want to hash their password. We don't want to store a user's password in plain text, but we want to do this automatically. So let's add a pre-save hook. So I can use our @pre decorator, and then I want to say pre-save, and then we can provide a function here. And the function is going to take one argument, and this is going to be next. Our function is also going to be an async function. And we can type this by providing our user class in the generic type here. So you can see pre, and then when we have this unknown generic, we can put our user class in here, and this is going to type out our function for us. Let's say if this dot is modified, and then we need to pass in the property that we're checking to see if it has been modified. So I'm going to say password, or this dot is new. So what we're saying here is if the password is being modified or the object is new, then we want to hash it. So we can say const hash is equal to await argon2, and this is going to import argon2 as argon2d. So just remove these brackets and the d. Dot hash this dot password. So you don't need to worry about salt or anything with argon2 because it's going to do that for you. Next, we want to replace the password that the user gave us with this new hash. So I can say this dot password is equal to hash. Then finally, we just want to return next. Okay, but our password's a hash. So how do we know if the password that the user provides us when they log in is correct? Well, we need to compare the passwords that the user provides us, so a plain text password, with the password that's hashed and stored on their user object. So let's do that with a method on our user class. So I'm going to say public async compare password. And this is supposed to be public, not publish. And this is going to take one argument, and it's going to be a password. And the password is, of course, a string. We're going to return a promise here, and the promise is going to resolve to a Boolean. So from this function, we just want to return await argon2 dot verify this dot password, and then we want to pass in our password. So what is this doing? We actually don't need a wait here because this is an async function, so it's already going to return a promise. So verify takes two arguments. This dot password is the hashed password stored on the user. And then we have this other password here that's the candidate password. So when the user logs in, they're going to provide us with this password, and then we're going to compare that password with the one stored on the user. And argon2 is going to take care of all the heavy lifting in this. This function is actually really complicated, but because we're using argon2, it seems very simple here. Create some routes for registering a user. So I'm going to come over to user routes, and I'm going to import express. So import express from express. I'm going to say const router is equal to express dot router. And at the end of this file, we just need to export default router. And then in here, we're just going to use our router to set up some routes. So I'm going to say router.post. And when we set up our router for our user routes, we're going to provide a prefix. So the prefix for all user routes is going to be /API/users. So when we provide a route here, we just need to say /, and that means we're just going to be listening for requests on /API/users. And you'll see that when we add our route to our main file. Next, we want to provide a handler here, but we don't have a handler. So let's come over to our user controller and create one. Okay, so inside of our user controller, I'm going to export an async function called register user handler. And register user handler is going to take two arguments. The first one is going to be the request. The second is going to be the response. And I'm going to do all the typings after I've finished completing the function. And that way you can understand the logic of the function without worrying about the TypeScript part. So const equals rec.body. And we're going to destructure request body. And we're going to get out some params. So we're going to get out a username. We're going to get out an email and a password. And next, we want to use these params to create a user. So I'm going to say try await, and we need to call a function here called create user. But remember, we don't call the database inside of our controllers. We call services inside of our controllers. So we need to create this create user service. Let's catch this error. And if we catch an error here, we want to test to see if the code is 11000. And if it is, it means that we've violated one of our unique properties on our model. So you can see on our model here, we have unique true for username and unique true for email. So if we violate one of these properties, we're going to throw an error. The alternative to catching this error here would be to say const user is equal to await find user, and then we could say if user, then return the error here. But we won't want to do that because that means that we're going to have to do 2 requests to the database. Instead, we just want to try create the user and get the database to enforce these unique properties that we've defined on our model. That is the role of a database. Let's say e.code is equal to 11,000,000. Then we want to return res.status, and we want to return a status code of conflict. But how do we know what that status code is? Well, we have a module called status codes. And you can see that we have this module status codes, and this is just going to assign status code numbers with some really handy names here. So what we want is a 409 conflict. Let's say status code.conflict.send, and then we're going to send a helpful message along with this. User already this. Otherwise, we just want to return res.status status code dot internal server error dot send e dot message. And this is because if we got down to this line here, we don't actually know what's happened. So we're just going to send the error out to the user. Okay, let's go create our create user service. So inside of our user service function, I'm going to say export async function create user. And this is going to take a single argument of a user. Next, I just want to return user model dot create user. You may be wondering, why do we use these services? Why don't we just use this inside of our controller? There's a few different reasons that you might want to add your database calls to a separate services file. One reason is that if you want to add metrics to your database calls with something such as Prometheus, adding the logic for those metrics becomes really easy and it's not spread around your application. Another reason is testing your application without a live database connection becomes really easy because you can just mock the functions inside of your services. Let's come back to our user controller, and I'm going to call our create user service, and I'm going to pass in our username, email, and our password. So if this call is successful, I just want to return a message back to the user. So I just want to return res.status status codes.created. And if we go in, we can see that this is going to return a 201 status code, which means that the resource was created. Then we want to send user created successfully. Okay, so this is our handler complete, but we have TypeScript complaining here. So let's go fix that up. So at the top of our file, I'm going to import from Express, and I'm going to import 2 objects, a request object and a response object. Then I'm going to type these as request and our response. Just a note, if you forget to import request and response, you're not going to see an error in here where you would expect to see the error, because request and response are globally available interfaces. Instead, they're going to be the wrong interface, and so you're going to get some really weird errors throughout your application that you could spend some time debugging. Just make sure you've imported request and response from Express. Another note, request and response are both generics. So if we command click into request, you can see that we can provide some properties here. So you can see that we have our params, our response body, and our request body. We're going to be creating some interfaces for our params and our request body. And that means that when we hover over request body, it's going to tell us exactly what we should expect in there. But to do that, we need to set up our schemas. So let's go do that now. I'm going to come over to user schema. And I'm going to import an object from Zod. And I'm going to import object, string, and type of. Next, I'm going to export a constant register user schema is equal to an object. And this object is only going to have one property. It's going to be body. But if your request had a body and say some params, you would put params here as well. But this request just includes a body. So our body is going to be of type object. And then inside of object, we have an object. The first property is our username. And our username is going to be a string. And we can provide an error message here. So in Zod, things are required by default. If you don't want it to be required, you can say .optional. But without optional, it is a required property. So we can provide a required error here. And our required error is just going to say username is required. And I want to create a few more properties. The next property is going to be email. The next one is going to be password. And then we have confirm password. So when we ask a user to register, they're going to provide our password, and then they're going to provide the password again, and we need to make sure that they're exactly the same. You could outsource this logic to your application. So inside of your user controller, you could say, well, if password doesn't equal confirm password, then throw an error. But Zod can do this for us, and this is kind of a nice place to put this logic. So on the body object here, so you can click this little bracket here, and VS Code should highlight the closing bracket. We can call .refine. And .refine is going to take one argument of data. And next we just want to say data.password is equal to data.confirm password. And if they're not equal, we want to provide a message. So I want to say message passwords do not match. And I can provide a path, and the path is just going to be confirm password. So what this is doing is it's just enforcing that data.password is equal to data.confirm password. And if it doesn't, then we're going to throw an error. And if the user gives us some input where the password does not equal confirm password, their request won't even reach the controller. So for password, I don't want users to be able to create a password that is less than 6 characters long. So on the password string, I'm going to call .min. And my first argument is going to be how long I want their password to be. So in this case, it's going to be 6 characters. And then I'm going to provide an error message when their password is shorter than 6 characters. So I'm going to say password must be at least 6 characters long. You can also provide a max here. So I can provide a max of, say, 64 characters. And then I can provide a message if they give us a password that's longer than 64 characters. It says password should not be longer than 64 characters. Okay, let's go hook our controller up to our route. So in our route here, I can say register user handler, and VS Code is going to import this from the controller. Let's come over to main.ts, and we need to tell our Express application about our new route. So I'm going to say app.use, and this is where I'm going to provide the route prefix. So I'm going to prefix mine with /API/users, and then I want to provide the user route. So I'm going to say user route, and then I can import user route from modules/user/user route. So our routes here are essentially Express middleware, and Express middleware gets run from top to bottom. So the first piece of middleware is going to be cookie parser, and then our JSON, and then our cores, and then helmet. So it's important that your routes go below these pieces of middleware, because if you have something that requires cookie parser, for example, then cookie parser is going to be run after your user route. So I like to just put all my middleware at the top here, and then the routes under those to make sure the routes have access to everything inside of middleware. You can see in our terminal here, we have an error user.username is type invalid. And to fix this, we need to come back into our tsconfig, and we need to find a property called emit decorator metadata. And we need to uncomment this. And you can see our application now starts up correctly. Let's try out our new route. So I'm going to come over to Postman inside of the user folder. I'm going to click register user, and you can see in the body here, we have a few properties. We have a username, password, email, and confirm password, and we have an unknown property here. So let's send this request, and you can see we get user created successfully. Let's have a look in our controller, and I just want to log out request body. So console.log request body. And let's send this again. We need to send it with a unique username and a unique email. And you can see on our request body, we have this unknown field here, but we don't want that to be the case. We just want our request body to be exactly what we defined in our schema. So let's go fix that now. So inside of our user routes, we're going to use a piece of middleware, and this piece of middleware is called process request body. And you can see this comes from a package called Zod Express middleware. And then this is going to take one argument, and that is going to be a Zod schema. So I'm going to say register user schema.body. Now let's try this again. Come back over to Postman. And you can see the unknown field is now gone. And that's because process request body is going to sanitize our request body with exactly what we defined in our schema. And before I told you that we're going to type out our request body. So let's do that. If we come back over to our user schema, we can use this schema here to export a TypeScript type. So I'm going to say export type register user body is equal to type of, and type of is a generic, and it's going to take a type of register user schema dot body. And the reason we need dot body here is because register user schema isn't a valid Zod object, but register user schema dot body is. So let's go use this register user body type inside of our user controller. So if we go into the interface, and I'll split the window here so you can see what's going on. So you can see the first argument here is going to be params. Well, we don't have any params, so let's just type that as an empty object. Then the second is going to be our response body. We don't really care about that, so let's type that as an empty object. And then our third argument here is the request body. So let's put this in as register user body. Now you can see that our request body has all of our types on it. So if I say rec.body. And you can see we get all of our properties here that are available on the request body. Let's try send a request with one of those properties missing. So I'm going to remove the username here. And you can see that we get this 400 error here. And this has never reached our controller. Zod handled this validation for us. Let's try one more thing. Let's try register a user that we already know is registered. So I'm going to register this user here. And you can see that we get back this 409 conflict. So this handler is all working as expected. Next, we'll allow the user to log in. I'm going to put my login logic in this auth module. And the reason that I'm going to do that is because I want the login route to be /API/auth. But inside of our main, we've said that all user routes start with /API/users. If you want your route to be /API/users/login, for example, you could just put that inside of your user routes. But I'm going to create a new module that's going to handle authentication. Another reason that you might want to do this is because for now, we're just going to have a login route in here. However, as your application grows, authentication is going to get more complicated. For example, you might want to add a Google OAuth integration, and having an auth module is a great place to put that logic. So inside of auth, let's create an auth controller. We're not going to have an auth model. However, if you're going to handle something like sessions, then you might want to have a session model, and that will go in your auth module. Create an auth.route.ts, auth.schema.ts, and we're also going to have an auth.utils. And auth.utils is just going to handle signing and verifying JWTs for us. So come into auth.controller and we're going to build our login handler in here. So I'm going to say export async function login handler. This is going to take a request and a response. We can import from Express our request and our response objects. So to log in, we expect the user to provide an email and a password. So I'm going to say const equals rec.body email and password. So the login flow is going to go something like this. We're going to find the user by email. We're going to compare user password. Sorry, not compare. We're just going to verify. To verify, we do a comparison. And then we're going to sign a JWT. We're going to add a cookie to the response. Then we're just going to respond. This is obviously the happy path. There could be a path where the user doesn't exist. So find user by email. We're going to do a check user exists. And at this point, we would throw an error. Sorry, we would return an error. We're going to verify the user's password. Of course, they could give us the wrong password. So if wrong password, then we're going to return an error. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is find the user by their email address. So I'm going to create a service inside of user service to do this. So I'm going to say export async function find user by email. And this is going to take one argument of email. I'm going to return user model dot find one, and I'm going to find one by the email. So there's one thing to note here. When you find things with Mongo, you want to make sure that you have an index on that field to make sure that lookups are really quick. But if you have a look at our user model, we didn't add an index to email. But Mongo is going to add an index for us. And the reason is because we have this unique property. So this model is going to have two indexes, one for username and one for email. So let's type out the input here. So email is of course going to be a string, but we can do a little bit better than that because email could be a property that exists on different objects. But we want to say that we're looking for the email that exists on the user object. So I'm going to say user, and I'm going to bring in user from user model. And this is just going to be a class. And then we're looking for the email property. For create user, we can say that we want the whole user input. But when we go to use this, you can see in user controller, we have an error here. And that's because on the input, we're missing a field, compare password. But of course, we're not going to pass in a compare password function. That makes no sense. So what we want is user, but with compare password omitted. So in TypeScript, we can use a utility type called omit. So omit is going to take two arguments. The first one is the object. The second is the property that we want to omit. And in this case, it's going to be compare password. So if we save this and we come back to user controller, you can see that TypeScript is now happy. Okay, so we're ready to find our user by the email. So I'm going to say const user is equal to await find user by email. And I want to pass in the email. And this check user exists or verify password. We could say if not user return, and then down here we could say if not user dot compare path. But in JavaScript we have short circuiting, so we can say if not user or not user dot compare password, and then we can pass in the password. And if the user doesn't exist, then we're going to short circuit here. And we're just going to go down to the line where we return. But if the user does exist, then it's going to do this second check to make sure that the user has provided the correct password. So if the user doesn't exist or the password is incorrect, we just want to return res.status, status code, unauthorized, send, And we just want to send a message that says invalid email or password. Of course, we don't want to tell the user if the user exists in the system or not. We just want to return an error that says invalid email or password, because if we tell them that the user exists, then they can just try a bunch of emails and they're going to get a good idea of what users do exist in our system. Next, we want to create a payload that we can put inside of our JWT. So I'm going to say payload is equal to user.toJSON. And we call .toJSON because user is going to be a model that has all sorts of stuff on it, such as compare password. But we just want the JSON from that model. The next thing we need to do is to sign a JWT. So let's go create a utility to do that. So inside of auth utils, I'm going to say export function sign JWT. Sign JWT is going to take a payload, and our payload is going to be a string or a buffer or an object. Next, we want to return JWT.sign, and we want to sign our payload. So import JWT from JSON web token, and we need to sign this with a secret. So I'm going to say const JWT secret is equal to process.end.jwt secret, or we're just going to have a string that says change me. So let's sign this JWT with our secret. And we need to set an expired property on this as well. So let's say const expires in is equal to process.end.expires in, or this is just going to be 7 days. So our JSON web token is going to last for 7 days. So as our third argument of sign, we're going to pass in options object, and this is going to be expires in, and then we're going to pass in our expires in constant. Next function we need is a verify JWT function. So I'm going to say export function verify JWT, and this is going to take a token, which is going to be a string. And when we call JWT.sign, it can throw an error, but we don't want to do that. Instead, we just want to return null. So I'm going to say try and catch. And if we catch an error, I just want to return null. Otherwise, let's say const decoded is equal to JWT.verify. I want to verify the token, and I want to use our JWT secret to do that. We have verified the token. Let's return decoded. And this should be decoded, not decodes. We'll go back to our controller, and now we can use that JWT util that we created. We can say const JWT equals sign JWT, and I want to sign our payload. The next thing I want to do is to attach a cookie to our response. So I'm going to say res.cookie. I want to call this cookie access token. We're going to put our JWT into the body of the cookie, and then we're going to provide some properties. So I'm going to set max age, and I'm going to set the max age to 1 year. So I'm going to say 3.154E10, and this is going to be 1 year. Next, I want to say HTTP only true. And this means that our cookie won't be accessible via JavaScript. And the reason we're doing that is because we don't need to access our cookie via JavaScript. We just want to access it via our HTTP requests. Next, I want to set domain, and I just want to set the domain to localhost. If you're going to deploy this application to production, you want to set our domain inside of an environment variable, and then you can use that environment variable here in your cookie. Set the path to just a backslash. I want to set same site to strict, and I want to set secure to false. Again, if you're going to do this into production with a HTTP URL, then you want to set secure to true. And that means that the cookie can only be used over a secure connection. But because we're just in a development environment here, we don't have a secure connection. And so we need to set secure to false. So finally, I just want to return res.status statuscodes.ok.send, and I'm just going to send the JWT along in the body of the request. Let's remove these comments. So we're going to have one big problem here, and you can see that we're getting the user, and then we're just calling user.toJSON, and then we're putting that whole payload inside of our JWT, but that includes our password. We don't want to include our password, so we need a way to remove password from our payload. So let's create a utility for emitting items from a function. So inside of source, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this helpers. And inside of helpers, I'm going to create a new file called emit.ts. And this function is going to look really weird when you first look at it, but I'll try to explain as best as possible what's actually going on. So I'm going to say function emit export defaults emit. An emit is going to take two properties. One is going to be an object, and an object is going to be t. And t is just going to be whatever they tell us that the property is. So I'm going to say emit takes a generic called t, and then the next property is going to be property. And this is going to be the property that they want to remove from the object. And this can be either a key of t, or it can be an array. So it could be key of t, and this is going to be an array. So how you would use this function, you just say const obj is equal to, and then I would say username Tom does tech. And then if I want to emit the username property, I would say emit obj. And then I could just pass in here username. You can see that TypeScript is helping us already because we've properly typed the arguments for this function. So we can emit the username. But what if we have two properties on here? I can say name, and name is just Tom, where we can pass an array here, and our array can be Tom and also username. And we want to omit all of these properties on here. So omitting just a single property is easy. We can say const is equal to obj, and then we want to spread the rest of the properties, and then we want to return the rest of the properties. But now we need to pick out the property inside of the property argument here. So we can use our square brackets property, and this is just going to be a dynamic key in an object. And then we're going to assign this to a variable called unused. So what's going to happen here is we're going to pick out the unused property, and we're just not going to do anything with it. And then we're going to get the rest of the properties, and we're going to return the rest of the properties. So our unused property has been omitted from the object. But what happens if we have an array of properties? So I can say if array.isArray, and then we can pass in properties. So we're saying if properties is an array, then we want to use this body of code. So you can say const entries is equal to object.entries obj.filter item const is equal to item. So object.entries is just going to turn our object into an array. Come over to the browser console here. I can say object.entries, and then I can pass in an object here. So I'm going to say username is Tom and password is password. So you can see that we have an array here with two items, and this is going to be a multi-dimensional array. So each item is going to have the first item in the array is going to be the key, and then the second item is going to be the property. So the first item is the key, so we'll pick out the key here. And then the second item here would just be the property, but we don't need that. Next, we want to return not property dot includes key, and then key here is a string, but we're looking for properties that are key of t. So we just need to say the key as key of t. And then finally, we need to return object.from entries. Let's go use this emit utility. So I'm going to wrap user.toJSON in emit. Make sure that's imported from your helpers. And then the second argument is going to be an array. And then you can see here that we get all of our properties on our user object. So I want to emit the password, but I also want to emit the _v property. So this means that our password is no longer going to live inside of our JWT and be sent to the client. And that's exactly what we want. The last thing to do to complete our handler is to type our request property here. So I'm going to come into auth.schema. I'm going to import from Zod. And from Zod, I'm going to import object, string, and type of. And this is going to look very familiar because we've done this before. Export const login schema is equal to an object body. Our body is going to be a Zod object. And our body is going to take two properties, an email and a password. So email is going to be a string. We're going to have a required error of email is required. We can also enforce that the type here is email. So I can say .email. And then if it's not a valid email, we can say not a valid email. And the next property is going to be password. This is going to be a string. Required error. Password is required. Our password also has a minimum length of 6. So I'm going to say password must be at least 6 characters. And the reason that I would match this schema here with the one that we have on our user is because when the request comes in, if the password is less than 6 characters or more than 64, then we know that it's going to be wrong, and we don't want that request to continue on to our controller. Let me say .max 64 password must not be longer than 64 characters. This .email here, we can go and add that to our user register schema as well. And this just means that when the user registers, it's going to enforce that email is a valid email. So I'm going to say email must be a valid email. So let's export a type for our login schema. So I'm going to say export type login body is equal to type of login schema dot body. So let's go use this schema and type on our route and in our controller. So the order here is request params, response body, request body. So login body. And you can see if we try to get another property on here, say this one, it's going to tell us that that property doesn't actually exist on our request body. So let's go build our login route. So I'm going to come over to auth, going to import express from express const router equal to express dot router dot post / login handler export default router. And we want to enforce our schema. So I'm going to say process request body. And this is going to take our login schema dot body. Let's go add our auth routes to our main file now. So at the top here, we can import auth route from module/auth/auth.route. Then under our user route, we can say auth route, and I want the prefix to be /API/auth. Let's go over to Postman and we can try this out. So I'm going to copy the email address from here, paste it in, and our password is still password, and the username is Tom3. Let's change that. So when we send this login request, you can see we get an access token, and when we go into cookies, you can see that we have this access token cookie now too. We can have a look at the response cookies, and that access token is available. The next thing we need to do is to implement this me route here. So this is going to get the currently logged in user. Before we do that, let's go implement two pieces of middleware. Create a new folder inside of source called middleware. And then the first piece of middleware is going to be deserialize user. So I'm going to say deserialize user.ts. And this piece of middleware is going to get the cookie, and it's going to deserialize that cookie into a user object. And then it's going to attach that user object onto a response, so we can use it throughout our application. So I'm going to say function deserialize user export default deserialize user. We're going to take three arguments here: request, response, and next. Whenever you use request and response, and sometimes next, make sure that they're in this order: request, response, next. It's really important. So for example, if you were to say rec next res, you're going to get some really weird bugs in your code, and it's going to be very hard to debug. So just make sure that these functions here are all in the correct order. To import from Express, request, response, and next function. Type these as request, response, and next function. So the first thing we need to do is to get the access token from either the authorization header or the access token cookie. So I'm going to say const access token is equal to rec.headers.authorization or rec.cookies.access token or an empty string. So we want to get one of these properties, and then we just want to remove any instance of the word bearer from that string. So let's wrap these in some brackets, and then we can say dot replace. I'm going to provide this regular expression here, and then we just want to replace this with an empty string. If the access token doesn't exist, then we just want to call our next function and not bother trying to add the user to res.locals.user. So if not access token, return next. Otherwise, we're going to try verify our JWT. So I say const decoded is equal to verify JWT, and this comes from our auth utils that we created earlier. We're going to pass in our access token as the single argument. Next, we're going to say if decoded, because remember, decoded can be null. Then we want to say res.locals.user equals decoded. And then finally, we want to return next. So I know a bunch of people in the comment section are going to ask me, why do you use res.locals.user? Where you could just say rec.user equals decoded. Well, functionally, both these things are the same. You're going to be able to access res.locals.user wherever you can access rec.user. But res.locals.user doesn't make TypeScript angry, and so I prefer it. The next piece of middleware is going to be require user. So this is a piece of middleware that we can use on our routes to make sure that the user is logged in before we hit the handler. And say require user.ts. I'm going to copy the import statement from Express from our deserialize user middleware. The function require user rec res next. I'm going to type these out. We can say const user equals, and we've just attached our user to res.locals.user. So this is where we would expect our user to live. But if not user, then we want to return a 403 status code. So I'm going to return res.statuscode, statuscodes.forbidden. And this is not res.statuscode, it's actually res.send status. Then we want to return next. Finally, export default require user. So you may be wondering, how do we know that res.locals.user is going to be available to us when we would call require user? Well, the reason is because deserialize user is always going to be run before require user. And to guarantee that, we're going to come over to main.ts and we're going to add our deserialize user middleware here under our middleware stack here. I'm going to say app.use deserialize user. And now we can use our require user inside of our routes. So let's go build a route to get the currently logged in user. And we need to use the require user middleware to do that. So inside of the user routes, I'm going to say router.get, and I'm just going to get on slash. So this is going to be /API/users. Then we're going to use our require user middleware, and we can just provide a callback function. We can say rec res. Then we can return res.send res.locals.user. So if you're wondering, how can we guarantee that res.locals.user is here and why do we not need to do that check? The reason is because we have this require user middleware. So we're going to call deserialize user. The user is going to get attached to res.locals.user. Then we're going to call require user, where we enforce that the user does actually exist on res.locals.user. And then finally, we're going to call our callback here, where we know that res.locals.user exists. Let's go test out this route. Come over to Postman. We can send this along, and you can see that we get back our deserialized user. The reason that this worked is because we have our cookies set here, and the cookie was set when we logged in. If I remove this cookie here and send this request again, you can see that we get back a 403 forbidden. If you've made it this far, congratulations. You've done a really good job so far. Make sure you stick around because things are about to get really interesting. We're about to create a video upload stream and an endpoint where you can stream your videos. Inside of the videos module here, I'm going to create a video controller. So video.controller.ts. I'm going to create a video model, video.model.ts, a video service.ts, video route.ts, and a video schema.ts. Let's create our router. So I'm going to import express from express and say const router is equal to express.router export default router. Import this into main. We're going to import video route from modules /videos/video route. Then I'm going to use app.use/API/videos, and I'm going to use the video route. If you're wondering why we're using plural here for users and videos, that's because that's a REST standard to use plural for the resource name. We have an error here in the console, and we have an error here that says we can't import anything from video route. And the reason for that is because I've put our video route inside of the video schema instead of the route file. So I'm just going to move that, and our application should start back up again. Come over to video model, and I'm going to import from typegoose/typegoose get model from class prop and ref. Export class video. And our video is going to have a few properties. The first one is going to be a title. and this is going to be a string. Let's make this public. And we need to add our prop annotation here. So I'm going to say @prop. And we're not going to have any mongoose arguments here. The next one is going to be a description. Next, we're going to have an extension. And the extension is just going to be the video extension. So we're only going to allow the user to upload .mp4 videos. So we can say enum, and we can provide an array here, and then we can say that we only allow mp4. If you want to allow other extensions such as mov, then you would of course put those in here. Next property we're going to have is the owner, and the owner is going to be a reference to the user. So we're going to say @prop required is going to be true. And we're going to have a ref, and a ref is going to take a function that returns the user object. Sorry, it's the user class. It's a public owner, and this is going to be a ref to user. But I've imported ref with a lowercase, but we need ref with an uppercase. And ref is a generic that's going to take our user class. The next thing is going to be a video ID, and this is going to be a short 10-character long ID that's going to be unique across videos. So say @prop, and we need to enforce it being unique. And remember, because we have this unique flag here, we're also going to get an index for this video ID, and that means lookups by video ID are going to be really fast. Defaults, and we want to default this to a nano ID ID. So I'm going to say nano ID, and you can see that we've imported nano ID from here, but nano ID is going to create an ID that looks like this. Well, I don't want an ID that looks like that, but I want an ID that only uses alphanumeric characters. So instead, I'm going to say custom alphabet, and then I'm going to say const nano ID is equal to custom alphabet. And then I'm going to pass in a string, and the string is going to be 1 through 9 and 0, and then A through to Z. And these are all the characters that are allowed inside of our ID. And then I just want our ID to be 10 characters long. I want to say public video ID, and it's going to be a string. The last property is going to be a Boolean property that says whether our video is published or not. So I'm going to say @prop default is going to be false. Public published Boolean. Let's export our video model. So export const video model is equal to get model from class. And of course, the class is our video class. And then we're going to pass in some schema options again because we want timestamps. And I'm going to say timestamps is true. Okay, let's go build our video upload handler. So inside of video controller, I'm going to export a new async function called upload video handler. That's going to take a request and a response. And of course, we can type these out, request and response. Make sure they come from Express. So when we upload a file, we don't want to have to store the whole file in memory and then write it to disk. What we want to be able to do is take chunks of the file and then write chunks of the file to disk. And this is going to mean that our application handles memory much more efficiently. If you just take a file from the request object, put it into memory, and then write it to disk, your application is not going to scale. And to help us do this, we're going to use a library called busboy. So I'm going to say const bb is equal to busboy. And into busboy, we're going to pass in our request headers. So I'm going to pass an object. The first property is going to be headers, and then headers is going to be equal to rec.headers. Next, I want to get the user. So I can say user is equal to res.locals.user. And the next thing I want to do is to create a video object. So let's come over to our video services. Export function create video. And this is just going to take one property, and this is going to be the owner. I'm going to set owner to a string. Then we want to return video model dot create, and we're going to set the owner. So you may be wondering, well, what about the title and the description? And this is just the flow that we're going to use. So what's going to happen is we're going to upload a video, we're going to create a video object, and then we're going to allow the user to edit that video object by setting a title and description and so forth. Next we say const video is equal to await create video, and the owner needs to be user dot underscore ID. Next thing we can do is to start uploading. So we can say bb.on, and we're going to listen for file, and we're going to provide an async callback. And the first argument we're not going to use, so I'm just going to put an underscore here. The next argument is going to be the file, and then the third argument is going to be some information about the file. The first thing we want to do is to check the MIME type of the file. So remember before how on our model we said that we only allow MP4 videos. So we want to make sure that the file being uploaded is in fact an MP4 video. So I can say if, and then we need an array of MIME types. So up the top here, I'm going to say const MIME types is equal to an array. And the MIME type that we want to allow is video/MP4. If you want to allow other video types, such as MOV, for example, then of course you would say video/MOV. So if not MIME types dot includes info dot MIME type, we want to return res.status, status codes dot bad request dot send invalid file type. At this point, you would want to delete the video that you created earlier, but I'm not going to do that for now. Next, I want to get the extension, so I can say const extension is equal to info.mimetype.split, and I want to split by this slash here because the MIME type is going to be video/MP4. And then I just want to get this second property. Next, we need to define a path for where we're going to save the video. So I'm going to create a little utility function here to resolve the path, because when we go to stream a video, we need to stream it from that same path. Function get path. And this is going to take a video ID and an extension. Video ID is going to be of type video and video ID. Extension is going to be of type video extension. So this path can be anything you want really, but I'm just going to set mine to a folder called videos inside of server. So inside of server here, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this videos. And I'm going to return process.cwd. And this is wherever the process is running, the directory for that. /videos /video ID dot, and then we can add on the extension. So we're going to save a bunch of files inside of this videos folder here, and the files are going to be named after the video ID. So next we can say const file path is equal to get path. We're going to pass in our video ID. Is going to be video.video ID. And the extension is going to be our extension. Next, we can update this video object here to include our extension now that we know what it is. So I can say video.extension is equal to extension. And then we can save that, await video.save. Next, we want to create a stream. So I'm going to say const stream is equal to fs, and fs is just a file system, so we need to import that. Fs from fs dot create write string, and we want to write to our file path. Next, we need to pipe our file into this stream. So I'm going to say file dot pipe, and then we can pipe our file into the stream. So now we have our video uploading. We just need to know when we're finished uploading and respond to the client. So I can say bb.on, close, provide a callback, and we want to write some headers. So I say res.write header. I want to write the status code of created. And then I want to write another header called connection, and the connection is going to be close. And then the content type is going to be application/JSON. The reason we need to set this is because we're going to write our video file to the response. So we can say res.write JSON.stringify video. And if we didn't have this content type application JSON, then our response is just going to be a string. Next, we can call res.end. And then finally, we need to return. So we need to return rec.pipe bb. So this is our file upload complete. Let's go hook it up to a router and check it out. So in video route, I'm going to say router.post to /. So this is going to be /API/videos. We're going to require a user to be logged in. And then we're going to call the upload video handler. Go over to Postman and make sure you're logged in. Click the login route. And then you can go over to upload video. And inside of body, you're going to see form data. And you can select a file in here. I'm just going to select this one here. It's about 300 megabytes. And we can click send. And then you can see that we get back a body here. And this body is our video information. So we have our extension of MP4 and we have a video ID. We go back over to our code, and inside of our videos folder here, you can see we have this oddly named video file. And this ID here is our video ID. So it's 3MVO and our video ID is 3MVO. So now that we have video upload working, we need to create a handler to update the video object. I'm going to say export async function update video handler. Take the request or run a response. We can type out our request and our response. And we're going to get our video ID out of param. So I'm going to say const equals rec.params. And I'm going to get the video ID. To make this a little bit easier, let's first go create our schema so we can type out request and response. So I'm going to come over to video schema. I'm going to import from Zod. And this time we're going to use a Boolean. We're going to use an object, a string, and of course, type of again. Export const update video schema equal to an object. And in the body, we're going to have a Zod object. We're going to be able to have a title. It's going to be a string. Then we're going to have a description. And then we're going to have published. Published is going to be a Boolean. Then we're going to have params. And params is going to be an object again. And we're going to have video ID. And that's going to be a string. We can export two types here. One is going to be for the body, and then one's going to be for the params. So I'm going to say export type update video body equal to type of update video schema dot body. Then we're going to have update video params, and this is going to be update video schema dot params. Let's come back into video controller and we can type this out. So remember, the first argument is params, so I can say update video params. The next argument is the response, and then the third argument is the body. So update video body. Now when we go to get stuff out of the body, we can say const equals rec dot body, and we can get out our title, our description, and our published Boolean. Next, I want to get the user ID from res.locals.user. So const equals res.locals.user, and I want to get the underscore ID, and I want to call that user ID. Next, we want to try find the video. So I'm going to say const video is equal to await find video. And we need to create this find video service. So let's come over and do that. Export function find video. And we want to get it by the video ID. Return video model dot find one. And we want to find it by the video ID. And video ID is going to be of type video ID. So let's try find the video. And I want to find it by the video ID from params. Next, we want to check that the video does actually exist. So I'm going to say if not video, return res.status. And we want to return a status code of 404, which is not found. So I'm going to say status codes dot not found dot send video not found. And then secondly, we need to check that the video owner is the user making the request, because you don't want users to be able to update other users' videos. So I'm going to say if video.owner is not equal to user ID, return res.status, and we want to send a status of unauthorized, status codes dot unauthorized dot send unauthorized. Otherwise, we just want to update the video. So we could call a function called find and update video. We already have the video object here. So let's just use that. So I'm going to say video dot title equal to title, video dot description equal to description, video dot published is equal to published. Then we need to save our newly updated video, await video dot save. Then we can return res dot status codes dot okay dot send video. Let's create a route for this function. Router dot patch slash, and then we want to put the video ID. We want to require user, and then we want to call the update video handler. Come back over to Postman, and you can see in Postman we have this test script here, And this test script is going to get the video ID from the response body, and then it's going to set an environment variable called video ID. And you can see that we just have that now set to this 3MV, which matches our latest upload video. So now we can update that video with some properties. So inside of the body, I'm going to set it to raw. I'm going to set the title to my awesome video, the description to description something, and then published to true. So you can see that we're getting unauthorized here, but this makes no sense because we're logged in and we're updating a video that this user created. And the issue is where we have video.owner and we're doing a strict equals user ID, video.owner is actually a Mongoose object ID. So let's just convert these to a string. And then when we do our strict equals, we're just going to make sure that they're both strings and not any other data type. And try this again. And you can see that we get our newly updated video here. The next thing we'll do is to create a route to get all of the uploaded videos. So inside of the video service, I'm going to create a function to find videos. Export function find videos. And then I want to return video model.find. And I just want to find videos that are published. And then I can call .lean on this because we don't need to use these video objects for anything. Let's create a handler for this. I'm going to say export async function find videos handler. With a const videos is equal to await find videos. Then I want to return res.status status codes .ok .send videos. And of course we need to import our request and our response. Because we don't use request here, you can just replace it with an underscore. And that denotes that there's a parameter here and we don't need that parameter. And then you can just say it's a request. Create an endpoint for this. So I'm going to say router.get / then I don't want to require user because any user logged in or logged out can stream videos. So I'm going to say find videos handler. Let's go try this. We have this get videos request here. We can send it and we get back an array of videos. So the next thing to do is to create a endpoint so we can stream videos. This is going to be the most complicated handler that we create, so bear with me. Export async function stream video handler. We're going to have our request and our response. Const equals rec.params. And we're going to have our video ID. Next, we want to get the range out of our headers. So I'm going to say const range is equal to rec.headers.range. And if we don't have a range header, we need to return an error. So I'm going to say if not range, return res.status status codes dot. And I want to return a status code of 400, and that's bad request. .send range must be provided. And the range header is going to tell the server what part of the document should be returned. Because remember, we're going to be streaming this file. So we're not just going to make a request for the file and then just send the whole 300 megabyte file back. We're just going to send back small chunks of the file. So the range here is going to tell us which chunk we should send back. Next, we want to find the video. So const video equals find video. And we want to find the video by the video ID. We say if not video, then we want to return a 404. So return res.status status codes dot not found dot send video not found. Next, we want to get the video path. So I'm going to say const file path is equal to get path. And this is the utility function that we created earlier to resolve the path for the video. I'm going to say video ID is equal to video dot video ID. And we're getting some errors here. And the reason is because we haven't called a wait here. And so video is just going to be a promise, and now it's going to be an object. And we can get the video ID, and the extension is going to be video.extension. Now that we have the file path, we need to get the file size in bytes. So I'm going to say const file size in bytes equal to fs.statsync. And we can pass in our file path dot size. And you can see that this is just going to return a number. Then we need to get the chunk start. So I'm going to say const chunk start is equal to range.replace. And I'm going to pass in a little regex here. And we want to replace this with an empty string. And we need to convert this to a number. So I'm going to use the number constructor to make sure that our chunk start is a number. And then we're going to calculate the chunk end. So I'm going to say const chunk end is equal to math.min chunk start plus, and we need to have a constant for chunk size in bytes. So this is the size of the chunk that we should get. And I'm just going to set this to 1 megabyte, but you can set this to whatever you like. And you could even detect the user's internet speed and then determine how big the chunk should be of that. So here's a const chunk size in bytes. It's equal to 1 million. And this is just going to be 1 megabyte. So we're going to say chunk start plus chunk size in bytes, or we want to get the file size in bytes minus 1. So we're going to compare two numbers here. We're going to get the chunk start, and then we're going to plus the chunk size in bytes. So if we start at, say, byte 0, and then we end at byte 1 million, then this number is going to be 1 million. Otherwise, we're going to get the file size in bytes minus 1, and then we're going to get the minimum, so whichever number is the least. And the reason that we do that is because we don't want to try to find a chunk that is outside of the file. So for example, if the video has 10 chunks and we try to find chunk 11, then we're going to be outside of the file's range. So this is just going to make sure that we stay within the file's range. Next, we need to calculate a content length so we can set a header. So I'm going to say content length is equal to chunk end minus chunk start plus 1. And this is going to say where in the file is this chunk coming from. Next, we're going to say const headers is equal to an object, and we're going to set some headers here. So the first header is content range. And this is going to be a string, and we're going to say bytes chunk start, then chunk end divided by file size in bytes. So we're going to say where the chunk starts, where the chunk ends, and then where we are out of the whole video's size. The next header is going to be accept ranges, and the accepted ranges is going to be bytes. we need to set a header for the content length. So content length. And then this is just going to be our content length. And then the next header is our content type. So content type is going to be video / video.extension. So this is just going to be the MIME type of our content. Next, we need to write a header that says that this is a partial response. So we need to say res.write head, and we want to call status codes.partial content. And this is going to be a 206, and it just tells the browser that it's part of a bigger file. And then we want to write our headers. Then the last thing we want to do is to create a read stream. So I'm going to say const video stream is equal to fs.create read stream. And we want to pass in our file path. And then we just want to pass in where we should start and where we should end. I'm going to say start is chunk start. And then end is chunk end. And then finally, we're just going to call video stream dot pipe, and we're going to pipe in our response. So the reason that we're doing this is we're just going to load up this chunk into memory and then send it off to the browser. If we didn't create a read stream, we would load all 300 megabytes of this file into memory before we sent it out to the browser. And that is obviously not going to scale very well. Come over to our video routes, and I'm going to create a route for streaming our video. So I'm going to say router.get, and then our param is going to be the video ID. We're not going to require a user. And then we're going to call stream video handler. Okay, let's go try this out. So we have this stream video here, and this is going to use our video ID. We can send this request and we get back a video player here. You can see that I have manually set a range header here. And this is just going to say that we just want the video from range 1. To get this working properly in Postman, you're going to need to set some other headers and everything, but the browser is going to do that for us. There's one last thing before we continue on to building the UI. If we go back into Stream Handler, there's another header that we need to set, and this header is going to be cross-origin resource policy, and we need to set this to cross-origin. And the reason for this is because our server is going to be running on port 4000, where our browser is going to be running on port 3000, or sorry, our UI is going to be running on port 3000. And so we're going to be streaming the video cross-origin, and the server needs to tell the browser that that's okay. So I'm going to add this header, and then I want to set this to cross-origin, but I'm just going to comment this out for now. So when we get to the streaming part, we experience the error, and you can see what the error looks like, so you can debug it yourself if you come across it. So that is the server part done. Let's get on to building the user interface. In the terminal, I'm just going to split my window here, and I'm going to bootstrap my client with this command here, yarn create next app. And you can see that we have the -- TypeScript. If you don't want to use TypeScript, that's okay. You can just remove this -- TypeScript. Next, I'm going to cd into the client, and I'm going to install some dependencies. So now that we have all of the dependencies installed, we can run our client with yarn dev, and we can go over to the browser, and you can see we have a fresh Next.js application here. So the first thing we need to do is to set up Mantine UI. So I'm going to come into Pages, I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this _document.tsx. So when you create a custom document, you can update the HTML and body tags used to render the page. This file is only rendered on the server. So event handlers like onClick cannot be used in document. I'm going to import from next/document. Then I'm going to import from @Mantine/next. And from document, I'm going to import HTML, head, main, and next script. From Mantine next, I'm going to import create .getInitialProps. Next, I'm going to export a function. So I'm going to say export default function document. And this document is just a component. So I'm going to return HTML, head, a body tag, and inside of the body tag, I'm going to return main and next script. So you can modify these tags if you like. For example, if you want to add a language code to HTML, you can say lang equals en. And this is going to modify the HTML tag and add the lang code to it. The last thing we want to do is to set document.getInitialProps to create initial props. So I'm going to say document.getInitialProps is equal to create initial props. And then we're going to execute this function. Then we're going to come over to the app TSX. And inside of app TSX, we're going to set up a Mentine provider. I'm going to import from @Mentine4, and I'm going to import the Mentine provider. And I'm just going to wrap the component in the provider. And inside of the provider, I want to pass in some props. So the first one is with global styles. The next one is with normalize CSS. And this is just going to normalize the CSS for you and remove and add to some browser styles. And then we want to set the theme. And I just want to set my theme for now to light. And color has no hue. And so this is not color theme, it's color scheme. Let's wrap our Mentine provider in a fragment so we can add some other properties to our underscore app. The first one I'm going to add is a head. And head comes from next/head. And here you can add properties that are going to go into the HTML head. So I'm going to set a title. And in my title, I'm just going to call this YouTube clone. And then I'm going to set a meta tag. Name equals viewport. And then the content is going to be minimum scale equals 1. Initial scale is equal to 1. And width equals device width. And then we need to close that tag. And you can use this head component inside of other pages as well. So you can overwrite the title by just using head and then providing a new title for that page. The next provider we're going to set up is the notification provider. So I'm going to import from @Mentine/ notifications, and I'm going to import the notification provider. I'm going to wrap the component in the notification provider. And next we want to be able to set up layouts. So inside of our index, we want to be able to set a layout for this page, but we don't want our layout logic to live inside of this page. So let's remove this next page, and I'm just going to remove a bunch of stuff from the here. And I'm also just going to remove the head. So inside of our underscore app.tsx, because we remove main, we can put main inside of app.tsx, and that's just going to make sure that every component is wrapped in this main tag. And next we need to make some types. So I'm going to say type next page with layout is equal to next page. And so basically we're just extending this next page type. Get layout, and you can call this function whatever you like. I think get layout is a good name for the function. And get layout might not exist, so we need to use the question mark here. Then this is going to return a function that has a page, and the page is going to be a React element. And then we need to return a React node. The next type is going to be app props with layout is equal to app props. Basically, what we're doing here is we're just extending the types that Next comes with to include our get layout. So it's going to be app props, and component is going to be our next page with layout. And then finally, down here where we type my app with app props, we just need to say it's app props with layout. And next we can say const get layout is equal to component dot, and you can see that we get our layout function here now, or it's just going to be equal to the page without a layout. So if get layout exists, then we're going to use it and we're going to wrap our component in get layout. Otherwise, we're just going to return the page. And by page, I just mean things inside of this pages folder. So for example, at the moment, we just have one index page. And then we can wrap main in our layout. So I'm going to say get layout, and then get layout is going to take our main and component as an argument. Okay, so let's go define this layout. So inside of my client, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this layout. And inside of the layout folder, I'm going to create a new file called home.tsx. And this is just going to be our homepage layout. So I'm going to declare a function called homepage layout. Then I'm going to export default homepage layout. And I'm going to use the app shell from Mentine to do this. So import from @core app shell. And homepage layout is going to take a single argument, and that is children. And then I'm going to say children is a React node. We're going to return app shell, and the body of app shell is going to be children, and then we can close off app shell. So I'm going to provide some props here on app shell. So I'm going to say padding is equal to MD. So this is just a medium level of padding. You can see that we get a bunch of properties here from LG, MD, SM, XL, and extra small. I'm going to do MD for a medium level of padding. I can provide a navbar component here. And I'm just going to write this component inside of this navbar options, but you might want to split navbar out so you can use it across different layouts. And in here, I'm just going to say this is the side items. And these are the items that are going to go down the side of your page. Let's provide some props on here. So I'm going to say width is equal to base of 300. Height is going to be a 500. And padding is just going to be extra small. Okay, so next we can provide a header. So I can say header equal to an object, and I'm going to use header from Mentine. Again, you probably want to define header inside of a different component so you can use it throughout your application and throughout different layouts. So header has a required property of height. So I'm going to say height is 60, and this just means it's going to be 60 pixels higher. And the padding, again, is just going to be extra small. So I'm going to provide a box here. And then I'm going to have another box. And box should come from Mentine. And inside of this second box here, I'm going to have an image. And the source is just going to be /logo.png. And the alt tag is going to be logo. The width is going to be 100 pixels. And then the height is going to be 40 pixels. And then we need to close that off. An image needs to come from Next. So I'm going to import image from Next/image. If you want the logo, you can look in the description below and you'll see a link to the repository, and the logo is just going to be in the public folder here. And I just have one little issue here. It's children, not child. So the next thing to do is to use this layout inside of our home page. So inside of home, we can say home.getLayout is equal to a function. And the function is going to take one argument of the page. And by the page, I mean this here. So the page is the component that the layout will wrap. And this is going to be a React element. And next we just want to return our home page layout. And then we want to put our page inside of that layout. Let's go have a look. And you can see here we have side items and we have our logo, and then our main content will go here. So let's go and create our authorization pages. So inside of pages, I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this auth. And inside of the auth folder, I'm going to create a new file called login.tsx. And I'm going to create another one called register.tsx. And then in login, I'm going to say function login page. Exports defaults login page. Going to return a div that just says login page. Do the same for register. So I'm just going to copy this. I'm going to change this to register. And if we go back to our application, we can now navigate to /auth/login, and we get our login page, and we can do the same with register. And we get our registration page. Before we start building out our register and login pages, we need to add one more provider to app. And this provider is going to be for React Query. And we're going to use React Query to interact with our API. I'm going to import from React Query. And I'm going to import query client and query client provider. And at the top of the file, I'm going to say const query client is equal to new query client. And then under our notification provider, I'm going to use the query client provider. And then I'm going to pass it one argument, and this is going to be client, and this is going to be our query client. If you're having any troubles with React Query, it might be worth downgrading React Query to version 2 or downgrading React from version 18 to 17 point something. Okay, so now we're ready to build out our registration page. I'm going to use Mantine forms to manage our form. So I'm going to say const form is equal to use form, and this comes from Mantine hooks. And we're going to have some initial values. We're going to have an email, a username, password, and confirm password. And these are all just going to be empty strings. And next I'm going to create a mutation with React Query. So const mutation equals use mutation. And the first argument here needs to be our mutation that we want to call. So in client, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to call this folder API. And inside API, I'm going to create a new file called index.tsx. And this is where we're going to put our calls to the server. So you say export function register user, and we're going to have a payload. And the payload is going to have a username, it's going to be a string, a password, which is going to be a string, an email, which is going to be a string, and confirm password, which is also going to be a string. And we're simply going to return Axios. We need to import Axios. .post and we need to set up our user base. So I'm going to say const base is equal to process.env.nextPublic API endpoint. And we need to set up this environment variable, and this needs to be next, not next. So I'm going to say const user base equals our base / API / users. And we can put in our user base here. And then we want to put in our payload. And then we can call .then. We're going to get the response, and we're just going to return the response .data. Okay, let's set up our next public API endpoint. So inside of client, create a new file and call this .env.local. And then you want to put in your next public API endpoint equals HTTP localhost 4000. You're going to want to set up different environment variables depending on where you've deployed your application. So if you deployed this to production, you can set an environment variable file here for production. And when you have next public underscore, this means that this variable will be available on both the client and the server. If you were to just call this API endpoint, on the client, it's going to be undefined. Okay, so we have register user set up. Let's go use this. And use mutation can take a few generics. So we have tdata here, terror, and tvariables. So tdata is just what we expect the API to return, and we just expect it to return a success message. So we're just going to say that this is a string. Our error, if we have a look in our API, we're just returning whatever Axios does. So we expect it to return an Axios error. So we can type this as Axios error. And our input, we can infer this from register user. So we can use a generic type called parameters, and we can pass in type of register user. And then if we have a look at this type, it's going to be an array. And so we just want to get the 0th element. So you can see our mutation here is now typed with username, password, email, and confirm password. And that comes from register user's input. So down in our component, let's change this div to just be a fragment. I'm going to put in a head element. I'm going to set the title to register user. I'm going to put in a container. And in the container, I'm going to have a title. And the title is just going to be register. Let me move this screen over so we can see what we're building. Next, I want to use paper to wrap our form. So I'm going to get paper from Maintain Core. And then inside this, I'm going to put a form element. And on the form element, I'm going to say on submit. We're going to call a function. We're going to call form.onSubmit. And this is going to pass in our values. And then we can call mutation.mutate, and we can pass in our values. So we need to pass values into there, and then we need to pass our values into mutation.mutate. Let's add a button, and this is just going to say register, and its type is going to be submit. Now, our page looks a little bit funny here, and that's because I have this head element and I've wrapped the whole page in this head, which is not what we want to do. We want to move head up and just encompass the title. So now this page is looking a little bit better. Let's add some form elements. I'm going to add a text input, which comes from Maintain Core. I'm going to give it a label of email, a placeholder of jane@example.com. I'm going to make this field required. And then I'm going to spread on form.getInputProps. form.get input props, and then we need to pass in the name of this prop, which is email. So we have our email property here. Let's add another text input for username. And we'll make the username placeholder tom_does_tech. And then the get input props is username. Next, we're going to need a password field. The label is going to be password. The placeholder is going to be your strong password. This is going to be required. And then we're going to spread on again, get input props, and this is going to be password. So we need one more input field, and this is going to be confirm password. Let's add some styles to our paper here. So I'm going to say width border. The shadow is going to be medium. The padding is just going to be 30. The margin top is also going to be 30. And then we're going to have a radius of MD. If you want these fields to be spread out a little bit more, inside of form, you can add a stack element. And then you can wrap all the form inputs in this stack. And then this is going to space out all your inputs nicely. So let's try click register, and you can see that we require this field. So let's add a notification. The second argument of use mutation is going to be an object. And in this object, we can have onMutate. And this is going to get called when we click the submit button. And then we have onSuccess. And onSuccess is going to get called when the mutation gets run successfully. And then finally, we have onError. And this is going to do exactly what onSuccess does, but if we get an error. So let's call show notification. And we're going to give this notification an ID. And the ID I'm going to give it is register. I'm going to give it a title of creating account, and then a message of please wait. And I'm going to set loading to true. So when the mutation first gets called, we're going to show this notification, and then we want to update this notification when we get a success or an error. So let's copy this here. And instead of calling show notification, we want to call update notification. And we're going to update the notification by the ID. Then the message is going to be successfully created account. And then the title is just going to be success. Let's do the same for error. You can say error could not create account. Okay, let's go try this out. So I'm going to use an email of t@t.com, a username of t, and password. Try register. And you can see we have successfully created account, and we have loading. So let's just remove loading from success and error. Try register again, and you see that we have error, could not create account, because this email and username is already registered. When we successfully register, we want to redirect to the login page. So let's set up our router. I'm going to say const router is equal to use router. And then on success, I want to say router.push /auth/login. I'm just going to delete all the accounts in the database. So let's try this again. t t.com. Username is t, password, and password. We can try register, and you see we get success and we are redirected back to the login page. Let's copy everything we have for the register page, and I'm just going to paste this into login, and then I'm going to change a few things here. So register page is going to get renamed to login page. We're not going to call register user. We're going to call another function called login user. So I'm going to export function login. This is going to take a payload, and the payload is going to be an object that has an email, a string, a password of string. Then we're going to return axios.post auth base. And we need to define auth base. And this is going to be base/API/auth. We're going to put in our payload. And then we need to have an options object here. And I'm going to say with credentials is true. Then we're just going to call this .then and return res.data. Let's use this login function instead of register user. So we can replace register user with login, and we're going to get the types from our login function. And I'm not going to show any notifications once the user logs in. I'm just going to redirect them back to the home page. Let's remove all of this. And then on success, we're just going to redirect back to the home page. The title is going to be login. The form title is going to be login. And then we just need the email, so we can remove username and we can remove confirm password. And we need to change the button text to login. Okay, let's try this. t@t.com and password. Okay, now we're successfully logged in. We need a way to fetch the currently logged in user. And to do this, I'm going to use React's context API. So in the client, create a new folder called context. And I'm just going to create a new file in here called me.tsx. So inside of me context, I'm going to create a new context provider. So I'm going to say const me context is equal to create context. And then the initial value is just going to be null. Next, the provider is going to be a function called me context provider. And this is going to take one argument of children. And then children is going to be a React node. So inside of this context provider, I'm going to fetch the user. If you want to server render your application, fetching the user inside of context is not really a good idea because it's going to make server rendering very difficult. Instead, you're going to want to fetch the user inside of get initial props or get server side props. And you can do that inside of your app.tsx file. You can have a function here called app.get server side props. And then you can return your user in here. But I'm going to do this inside of context so you get a chance to use React's context API. So I'm going to say const equals use query. And we need to provide a function here. So I'm going to come back to API. And I'm going to export a function called getMe. So I'm going to export function getMe. And I'm going to return axios.get user base. And we want to provide with credentials again. So I'm going to say with credentials is true. Then res, and then I'm going to return res.data. And this time we're going to catch the error because if the user's not logged in, we don't really care. We just want to return null. We don't want to throw an error or anything. So the first argument inside of getQuery is a query key. And for the query key, I'm going to use an enum. So inside of client, create a new folder and call this types. And then inside of types, I'm just going to create an index file. I'm going to export enum query keys. And then I'm going to have me is equal to me. Where we're in here, we're also going to query for videos. So I'm going to have a query key for videos that equals videos. And this is just going to make sure that we keep our query keys consistent throughout our application. Let's also export a type for me. So I'm going to export interface me, and we're going to have an ID. It's going to be a string. We're going to have an email. It's going to be a string. And we're going to have a username, which will be a string. And these are the fields we're just going to use for now. Of course, the user has more fields than this. Okay, so let's use query key dot me, and then we need to call the get me function. Okay, so this is going to return data is loading and a refetch function. So we want to be able to refetch the user when they log in so we can populate their data on the client. Next, let's return me context dot provider. And we want to return children, but we only want to return children if loading has finished. So I'm going to say is loading. Otherwise, return children. And if we are loading, then I want to return loader. And this is just going to be a spinner from ManTime. So we need to provide a value. And this value is going to be user. And that's going to be equal to our data. We need another set of curly brackets here. And we also want to return a refetch function. Next, we need to say const use me is equal to a function that returns use context with me context. I'm going to export an object, me provider, and use me. Okay, so we're getting an error here, and this is because we need to type out our context. So we can provide a generic here, and we can say user is equal to me, and me comes from our types that we just defined. And this is going to be an object. And then we can have refetch. And if we hover over refetch here, we can use this type here. So I'm just going to copy this type, and then I'm going to type refetch as this. And we can import these types here from React Query. And it looks like we need to copy the whole refetch type. So let's copy all of this and type refetch again. And we have a problem here. Null is not assignable to either of these types, but we have no other objects to put in here. So the only option here is to just use a tsignore. So let's go use this provider, and I'm going to call this provider inside of our underscore app. So just above get layout, I'm going to say me context provider, and then I'm going to close that off. And then inside of our layout, we should be able to use me. So I can say const equals use me. And here we're going to get our user and our refetch. So now that we know if the user is logged in or not, we can provide some links for them to log in and register. Otherwise, we can provide a button for them to upload a video. So I'm going to say, if not user, then I want to return a fragment. And inside of this fragment, I'm going to have a link. And the link is going to have an anchor. And the anchor text is going to be login. And the link's href is going to be /auth/login. And we need to pass in pass href. Let's do the same with our register link. So /register. Otherwise, if the user is logged in, we can say user and upload a video. So here comes the fun part. We're going to create a dialog where you can upload a video. So I'm going to make a new folder inside of client called components. And inside of components, I'm going to create a new component called upload video.tsx. And uploading a video is going to have two parts. Firstly, you're going to upload the video, and then you're going to be able to edit the video's details. So I'm going to say function upload video. I'm going to export default upload video. And in here, I'm going to return a fragment. And the first part of the fragment is going to be a modal. So I'm going to import modal. We need to control the modal state. So I'm going to say const equals use state. And this is going to be opened and set opened. And then on our modal, we need to say opened is equal to opened. And because we don't want our modal to close if you click outside, we need to say close on click outside is equal to false. And on close, we need to call set opened to false. So that just means when we click the X, the modal is actually going to close. We're getting an error here, and that's because type false is not assignable to undefined. That's because the initial state is undefined. So we want to set the initial state to false, and this is going to tell React that we expect use state to be a Boolean in this case. I'm going to set a title of upload video and a size of XL. So now we just need a button to control this modal. I'm going to say button upload video. And then when you click this button, it's going to set modal opened to true. So on click equals a function set opened to true. We need to import button from maintain core. So let's log in so we can see our button. So you can see here, upload a video. We just need to replace this text with our component. And we have a button here. And when we click it, it opens up a modal. So inside of this modal, we're going to have a drop zone where you can drop a video. We can say drop zone. And I'm going to import drop zone from maintain/drop zone. So import from @maintain/drop zone. We're going to have an onDrop, and this is going to be a function that returns the files. Then we're going to have accept, and this is the MIME types that our drop zone accepts. So this is going to be an array, and we have some MIME types enum that come from maintain/drop zone. So we just want to accept the MP4 upload. I'm going to set multiple with false. And then we have a callback in the child parameter of drop zone. And this callback has a property called status. So inside of this child, we want to return the drop zone children. So let's create a group. And I'm going to have an arrow icon. So arrow, big, and these icons are going to come from tablet icons. So imports from tablet icons React. And the icon that I want to import is arrow, big, up. line. Let's use this icon. We have a little issue here because we need to return a React component. And then I want some text. And the text is just going to say drag video here or click to find. So you can see we have this little drag and drop section here. I just want to style this a little bit better. So I want to say position is center, spacing is Excel, and I'm going to provide some style. And this style attribute is really good. It allows you to style inner components of the main component. So I want to say the minimum height is going to be 50 VH. And I want to justify content center and the direction is going to be column. So the arrow just sits on top of the text here. Okay, so when we drop a file, we want it to upload. So let's create a new function here. So function upload, and I say const form data equals new form data. And we're going to get the files in here. Then I want to say form data.append video. And we want to get files in the 0th element. And this files here is going to be an array of file. Next, we want to call a mutation. So I'm going to define a new mutation. So I'm going to say const mutation is equal to use mutation. And we need to create an upload video API. So I'm going to come into APIs, export function, upload video. And this is going to take a couple of parameters. One is going to be form data. And the next one is going to be config. So this is config that we can pass into Axios. Let's type this. I'm going to say form data is of type form data. And then config is going to be an object that has one method called on upload progress. We're going to have a progress event, which is of type any. And then this is going to return void. Let's return axios.post, and we need a videos base. So I can say videos is equal to base/API/videos. And this is going to post to our videos base. We're going to add our form data. We're going to say with credentials is true. We're going to spread on our config. And we want to provide an extra header. So I'm going to say headers. And I'm going to set the content type to multi-part form data. The content type is multi-part / form data. Then we just want to call .then res. We say res.data. Okay, so come back to the upload video. And then in our mutation, we're going to call upload video from our API. And I'm going to create a config that we need to pass into Axios. So I'm going to say const config is equal to an object. Now we have on upload progress. We have a progress event, which unfortunately is of type any. Next, we need to store our progress. So I'm going to say const equals use state, and this is just going to default to 0. Progress, set progress. And now we need to calculate our progress in a percentage. So I'm going to say const percent equals math.round progress event dot loaded times 100 divided by progress event dot total. And I need to wrap progress event dot loaded and times 100 in some brackets. And next we just want to set progress to our percent. So we can come back to our upload function here, and we can say mutation.mutate, and we can pass in our form data and our config. And this form date should actually be called form data. And we need to rename it there too. So now we just need to call upload. So on drop, we can say upload, and then we need to call upload with our files. So next, let's visualize our progress. So just outside of the drop zone, I want to say progress is greater than 0. Then I want to show a progress bar. So I want to say progress. And the progress bar comes from Mentine, and it's just going to be a self-closing component. I'm going to set the size to XL. I'm going to set the label is going to be a string, and this is going to be our progress with a percent symbol after. And then the value is going to be progress. And then I'm going to put a margin bottom on this of XL. Okay, so let's try this out. So I have this video here. I'm going to drop it on, and you can see we get our progress and it uploads to 100%. Okay, so when we show progress, let's not show our drop zone anymore. So I only want to show drop zone if progress is equal to 0. And if progress is above 0, then we want to show our progress bar. So if progress is at 100%, now we want to show our edit video form. So let's collapse all this, and I'm going to create a new component at the top here, function edit video form. And this is going to take a video ID that's of type string, and it's going to take set opened, and set opened is going to be of type dispatch, set state action, and we want to set a Boolean. So I want to create a form here. So I'm going to say const form is equal to use form. And then the initial state is going to be an object. We're going to have a title, which is going to be an empty string. We're going to have a description, which is going to be an empty string. And we're going to have published. And I'm just going to default published to true, just for convenience sake. Next, we want to create a mutation. So I'm going to say const mutation is equal to use mutation. And we need an API for this. So we can come back over to our APIs, export function, update video. And we're going to have an object that takes a video ID, and then we can just spread the rest of the payload on, because we don't really care what's in the body here. And we can type all this out. So video ID is going to be a string. Title is going to be a string. description is going to be a string, and published is going to be a Boolean. Next, return axios.patch videos base / video ID. Then we want to attach the payload. We want to call it with credentials again. And this is our upload video API, so we can go use this. Upload video. And we can type this out again. So use mutation, upload video is going to return an object of video. So let's go type out our video. So I have this interface here, and this is just what we expect the video API to respond with. So we can say that this is a video. It's going to return an Axios error if we have any problems. And the input is going to be parameters, type of, upload video, and then again, it's just going to be the 0th parameter. The reason that it's the 0th parameter is if I take this out, you can see the type a little bit better. I'm going to say type input equals type of parameters, upload video. And if we have a look at this, you can see that it's an array. And that's because arguments in a function are an array. It's just that we're only using one element here, and that's because it's an object. So we need to grab the 0th element there. If you want to, you can also use input here and create the type just above. So on success, we just want to set opened to false. So set opened false. So once we're finished updating the video, we just want to close it and show all the videos on the page. So I'm going to return a form here. And our forms on submit is going to be form.onSubmit. And this is going to take values. And then we're going to call mutation.mutate. And we're going to mutate with the video ID and all the values. We have a little error here, and that's because we've used upload video instead of update video. So I'm going to say update video. And you can see the TypeScript is still complaining here. And that's because this video interface here is not actually what Axios is going to return. It's going to return an Axios response with video. So we can change this and say Axios response, and then we can just pass in video here. So let's add some fields to our form. I'm going to use a stack. And I'm going to have a text input. And the text input's label is just going to be title. I'm going to make this required. The placeholder is going to be my awesome video. And then I need to spread on form.get input props. Form.get input props. And this is going to be title. Let's copy this down and do the same for description. Just going to remove the placeholder for description. And then I'm going to have a switch. And this is going to be label equals published. And I'm going to spread on the get input props. And this is going to be published. And then finally, we just need a button that says save. And this button is just going to have a type of submit. So let's try this. I'm going to upload a file. And we're not rendering our form, so let's go do that. If we have mutation data, so mutation.data, then we want to render our video update form. And we just need to pass in the video ID. So I'm going to say video ID is equal to mutation.data.video ID. And then set opened is equal to set opened. Okay, so now our form is rendering. Let's try fill in some details here. Set this to published and save, and we get nothing. So let's go fetch some videos. Before we do that, I'm just going to set this sidebar here to be a little bit smaller so we can see the actual content. So I'm just going to set this to 10 for now. So I'm going to use context API again to fetch videos. And that means that you can use this context wherever you like, and then you can just use videos in the actual components. So inside of context, I'm going to create a new file called videos.tsx. So const video context is equal to create context. And we're going to initialize this with null. Next, we're going to say function videos context provider. We're going to have children, and then children is going to be a React node. Then we're going to return video context dot provider. And we're going to render our children. And we need to fetch some data. So I'm going to say const equals use query. And we're going to get our query keys dot videos. And we need to create a fetch videos function. So come back to API and say export function get videos. And I'm just going to return axios.get our videos base dot then res, and we're going to return res.data. So now we can use our get videos. We're going to get data is loading, and we're also going to get refetch. So let's populate our provider. So I'm going to say value is equal to videos is going to be data and refetch. Now we can type all this out. So inside of create context, we have a generic as an object. We have videos. It's going to be of type video. And this is going to be an array. And we have refetch. And we have refetch in here. So let's just copy this type, and we can copy the TS ignore as well. And we need to import these from React Query. So let's do the same thing. If the data is loading, then let's just return the loader instead. So loader. Otherwise, we're going to return children. Next, say const use video is equal to a function that returns use context with video context, and we can export an object video provider and use video. So let's add this provider to our layout, and we can wrap our children in it here. So I can say video context provider. And now in our home page, we can render out some videos. So I'm going to say const equals use videos. And we can just JSON.stringify out these videos. Make sure it actually renders the data. You can see we're fetching some videos here successfully. When we upload a video, however, we want to refetch. So come back into video upload. And then when we edit, on success, we want to refetch. So in this component here, we can say const equals use video, and we can get refetch, and we can refetch down here. So let's try this flow again. So we're going to upload. So if we try upload a video, we get an error here. Refetch is null. So the reason for this is because if we come back to our layout, you can see that we've just wrapped our provider around children, but upload video is up here. And so upload video is not within our provider, and therefore it's going to be undefined. So let's move this down below app shell, and then we can move the start of our provider component above app shell. And then everything inside of app shell will be inside of our provider. So let's try this again. So we can say my awesome video, add a description, we'll set it to published, save, and you can see that we have another video here. Let's create a component for the video teaser. So I'm gonna say new file, video teaser.csx, and say function video teaser, going to return a link, and we're just going to link to the video page. So the href is going to be /watch/video ID, and it's actually going to be video.videoid, and we're going to take one argument here, and that's going to be the video, and this is going to be of type video, which comes from our types. Let's export this before we forget. Next, I want to have a card. And inside of the card, I'm going to have some text. And in the text, I'm going to have the video.title. Then I'm going to have some more text. And inside of here, I'm going to have video.description. We need to import text from maintain core. So let's add some styles. So card, I'm going to have a shadow. I'm going to have some padding of XL. The component is going to be an anchor, so an A tag. And then the href is going to be whatever we have at the top here. So I'm just going to copy this, pass it in here. And in our next link, we need to call pass href. So we pass the href down into this component. On our title text, I'm going to give it a weight of 500 and a size of large. And then our description text size is just going to be small. Let's go back to our home page, and we can map through our videos and just display the video teaser instead of JSON stringifying. So I'm going to say videos or an empty array dot map. And I'm going to get a video object here, and I'm going to return a video teaser. And then I'm going to pass video in as video. We also need a key property here, and the key is just going to be the video.videoid. So this looks okay. I'm just going to wrap this in a simple grid, and this is going to give us a little bit better spacing. And I'm going to make the columns equal to 3. Okay, so this looks funny because I have the window so small. Let's just make it half the screen. And when we click on one of these, we're going to go to the watch page, but right now we just get a 404. So let's create this page. So I'm going to create a new folder called watch. And then inside of the watch folder, I'm going to create a new component called video id.tsx. And the video ID part needs to be wrapped in square brackets. And this is going to tell Next that this is a dynamic route. So if we refresh this here, you can see that we're no longer getting a 404, but we do get an error. So let's say function watch video page exports default watch video page. Let's say const router is equal to use router. And then I'm just going to return a div that says hello. So we have our hello div here. And so we want to get the video ID out of the query parameters. So instead of router, I'm just going to get query. And then video ID is going to be query.videoID. So inside of our div, I'm going to have a video element. And the source of this video is going to be process.end.next public API endpoint /API/videos /query.videoID. I'm going to set the width to 800 pixels. I'm going to set the height to auto. I'm going to put controls on here. I'm going to set autoplay to true. And then the ID is just going to be video player. So you can see that we have a nice video player here, but we have an error. And it says here, error blocked by response, not same origin. So if you remember a long time ago, we set up a API route for streaming a video. And we had this header here, cross-origin resource policy, and we commented out, and this is the error that this header here is going to fix. So let's uncomment it, save our server, come back and refresh, and we now get a streaming video. Let's have a look at the network panel. And we can play our video, and then we can move to somewhere in the middle. And you can see all of these chunks that we're downloading. And if we have a look at the size, you can see that all of these chunks are 1 megabyte each. And that's because that's what we set as the chunk size. So that is how to make a YouTube clone. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure you like the video and subscribe. Creating this video has been a lot of fun, but it's also been a lot of work. And so you subscribing would mean a lot to me. If you require any help with the project, please make sure you join the Tom Does Tech Discord. You'll find the invite link in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.